Yo, 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 yo. It's your boy, Vic Raw. I'm out of the mix. I've been in the cut, and I'm here to finally say what's up. Today, welcome to the first episode of Behind the Design, where we break down who designers are as people, as individuals, as creators, beyond the artwork and the beautiful things that they produce. Today, we have no other than Ferris, who is hailing all the way from the country of Qatar. Without further ado, who are you? What do you do? And why are you here with us today?
Yeah, man. Yeah. I want to start off by saying I love what you guys do, checking it out. So checking out who the artist is behind the art. That's awesome. I like that. So my name is Ferris. I'm a 23-year-old designer. But first and foremost, like I told Victor over here, I'm an architect, and so we talk about the freelance side of what people are doing. I like to say that, luckily enough for me, I don't depend on that. A lot of my homies do depend on it as their main source of income. And so one big thing that we'll get into is that really provides a cushion for me. It's not as much pressure on my freelancing graphic design. But yeah, I'm a graphic designer. I'm a international student, and yeah, recently graduated. So sort of like moving around the world. I lived in LA for the last 6 years. Just moved back after graduation,
Uh,
and yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, what would you say got you in design in the first place?
So I don't want to be that cliche kid who's I've always been creative, but it's there's truth to it. I've always felt like I've been a little more creative. And so pursuing my career in architecture really let me hone in on my skills for graphic design. And so after the first couple, the first year, second year, sort of got a grasp of these programs and figured out I can explore more than just like what the professional world has to offer. I can also explore what I have to offer in my head and use the medium of Photoshop or any 3D rendering softwares and such.
Gotcha, gotcha. So, what is your favorite part about design?
Oh man, it's a loaded question. Honestly, at this point, I consider it a form of meditation. It's the way, it's sort of like an outlet for you to get your creative energy out. And without that, sort of like people work out, people make music. It's whatever your form of expressing your creativity is. It's a form of meditation. It's something I need now. Without it, without a
Yeah.
day of design, I just feel like, man, like something's missing.
Wow. So, can you walk us through your creative process and how it may vary with different clients that you're working and you're interacting with?
So it totally depends on the project. If it's a client who's approached me regarding some type of cover art that I've done in the past for one of their music or an album or a track or something, that's definitely a much more calculated process. And so I sit with the client. I figure out, first of all, I listen to the track. I figure out what their vision is, and then from that, I sort of provide like two or three versions of what I, kind of go through on the computer, just go through the motions, see what ends up on my canvas, and show that to the client, see what he likes, see what he wanted to change. Um, and yeah, you go through the first edition, second edition, eventually the third edition, you probably hit the nail on the head. But in terms of the stuff that I do, if it's not for a client, it's just for myself. Like you said, it's totally right in the wave, going with the flow. Something, I'd be out, maybe let's say for example sun tanning. This is how most of the ideas come to me. I'm out in the sun, man. I'm getting them waves, and something just something comes into
Yeah.
my head, and yeah. So we start off sort of opening up a blank canvas, um, and sort of just like putting all the elements that I was thinking of on that canvas. And the way they come
Mm.
together, the way they work, that's all just kind of natural. You know, I don't want to say
Got
it's coming
you.
to me. It's more coming from the artwork.
Of course, you're working with clients of different shapes, different sizes, different pedigrees. You know, they're coming with different deliverable requirements. Um, can you talk about how it is working with different clients? And can you talk a bit about your process? Like, does it vary from person to person based on what they want? Or do you have something that's clear cut, that's, you know, straight to the point?
Yeah, so you know, obviously, as I'm sure a lot of people who are just starting out are aware of, your name isn't out there, so no one's really coming to you. You know, especially not to spend their money on something to
Yeah.
someone you know who they've never heard of. And so, you know, I don't know how most people started, but I started off doing a couple projects for free for the homies. You know, everyone's a creative. You're in a creative circle, so all your friends have something in the works. And so I was proud to be able to like represent their works from the graphic design aspect. But of course, the first
Yeah.
couple projects you can't charge for that because you got to prove
Yeah.
yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So you're almost doing them a favor, and that gives them incentive to kind of give you a chance because they're not spending their money
Mm,
on you.
right.
This was 2 or 3 years ago after proving myself and having a couple of you know singles and albums represent my artwork. I I'd say the hardest part was actually being able to figure out how I'm gonna price it. People,
Mm,
man, that is so hard. That was the worst
that
thing,
is,
especially because
we're gonna get to that for sure.
yeah,
Keep
yeah,
going.
yeah. But once I kind of, you know, obviously the first couple of attempts at charging people, I, you know, lost a lot of money or maybe charged too much, lost the client. But you kind of figure out the balance, like you said. We'll get into that. But yeah, it's really trying to get into the head of the artist, of the client.
Yeah.
So you figure out like where they're coming from. You figure out what they
Yeah.
kind of want, what their energies are, and then you try and match whatever the product is to their vision. So essentially, I try
Mm,
to like channel myself as the medium who gets their ideas onto
yeah.
the software, and you know, just because they don't have the skills to do it, they can kind of fill me in there. So
Right. Got you. Gotcha. So
yeah,
now,
yeah,
okay. Now, like so we're already talking about how you're working with clients. Typically, like how did you like so this, you know, we're putting this podcast out to, you know, one, provide like inspiration to young designers that are coming up in the game, because it's like the market is everywhere right now, right? Like you have young kids that are out here charging 1K per cover art. Then you have other people that have a lot of experience but don't know how to market themselves, that are probably charging $100, $200. So like you said, right, like you started out by charging the homies. I'm not charging, like doing the favor for the homies, and then you built the confidence. From that confidence that you built up, then you got into a position where you're like, okay, now like I can actually start charging. But like what were your platforms that you started out, like how were you able to get the first few people to say, like, to DM you and ask you like inquiries? Or was it like you were reaching, like how did that process work? How did you get here?
got got you. Yeah. So it's you know after the first couple projects, it's inevitable that you're gonna tap into a network. And
Mm,
so like we said, like I worked for a couple homies who make, you know, it's pretty diverse. Some homies make this alternative indie type of rock, so I did a cover art for them for free. My first ever project was for a techno album. One of my friends is into electro
hey,
music, techno music, so I made
all
that for
right,
him. Then most of the homies who have artwork, who needed artwork for their rap songs, for their rap albums, I did that for them too. And as a designer, it
mm,
was fun to sort of explore what genres look like as you know
yeah,
as a cover art. That was really cool for me. But
yeah,
you know, after the first couple projects for free, you inevitably tap into a network, and so they start telling their friends, "Oh shit, man, dope cover." My bad. I don't know if we can swear. Uh,
nah, bro, this is
okay,
all you, like
okay,
we out
cool.
here, nah.
Cool. Yeah, they're like, oh, that's cool. That's cool cover art. Who did that? And then, you know, slowly your name starts to gain some traction. And, you know, as designers, you always know there's value to your artwork, but you step
Facts.
away or you shy away from putting that number on it. And so it's
Mm,
more so it's more so charging for your time rather than the quality of what you're producing, you know? Because
Right.
if you're confident, you know you're going to produce some dope shit, but then you're
Facts.
charging the client for them to eat up a little bit of your days for you to be able to do that for them. So yeah.
Right. Okay. Nah, like you got to, you know, a couple of things that were just very interesting. The main thing that I'm getting is, okay, you start out, but you started out homies from the homies. Now they have networks, they have friends of other people. So really the main thing for you is trying to get that word of mouth. And, you know,
Yeah.
like you said earlier at the top of the interview, right? Like this is not your main source of income, and you know you have a job in architecture. So now can you talk about you know, like how, when do you take on a client? Like, you know, now we can get into more of the pricing aspect into things. Like, okay, like what do you need to know from the client? How are you able to price them based on what they're asking for? And then from there, like, you know, what actually I'll leave it there because those are already two condensed questions.
Got
We're
you, got
cooking.
you,
Go ahead.
got you. Yeah, so in terms of how you price it, it's generally about what the product is, how deep, we're talking about digital art here. So how deep the piece
Right.
is, how many layers it gets into, and then more so how many additions they need. And so, you provide your first final piece, they give feedback, you provide an edited second piece, like that has that feedback taken into account, and then maybe a
Hmm.
third, maybe a fourth, but however many additions will determine the pricing, as well as, like I said, it's mainly about how much time it's eating up in my day. But
Yeah.
all that stuff is agreed before the payment is made. You're given a deadline. You're given sort of scope of the project.
Mm,
It's very similar to when you're getting like a client in architecture. Like they're not about to blow
yeah.
hundreds of thousands of dollars without an idea of what you're doing or scope of work.
Yeah.
And so you agree on that. It's non-contractual, so it's not exactly like, oh, you can be a day late or a little early.
Hmm.
It's just kind of like, you trust me, I trust you, you're building up my reputation, I build up yours. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's about, just respecting the timeline that you designate.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we get in the numbers, like I could charge anything between $100 to $400. The most expensive project that I've done was one. It was like a one-off thing. I did that for
Yeah.
$550. Um,
Nice.
and that ends up just on a 10-inch by 10-inch digital canvas. But that much money went into it because it was a couple additions
Mm.
that we had to do, a couple of changes that had to be made, and the whole project took about 4 months. And so, like I said,
Wow. 4 months.
yeah, yeah, it was four
Yeesh.
months. It was over the time of 4 months. Um,
Yeesh.
a lot of my clients are international, and so a lot of that is
Hmm.
from just like the barrier of communication, time differences stuck as well. Especially because I was born here in Qatar, but I was based in
Yeah.
LA, and that's 12-hour time difference, 11 to 12-hour
Mm.
time difference, depending on daylight savings. And so it's like the worst case of time difference. You're exactly half a day ahead, and trying to sort of, communicate. There's a huge barrier there. But
Yes.
yeah, most of my clients have been in LA. I kind of, like I said, I was exposed to that network after working for a couple of people for
Right.
free. Uh, I'm currently on a project for a homie here who
Mm.
I'm not really charging, even though I'm at the point in my career where I am charging people, but I owe him a
Yeah.
favor, and so I got that
That's
for him.
homie. That's the homie.
Yeah, that's homie, exactly. I'm not gonna charge. Yeah, yeah, but yeah, it's pretty cool. It's, like I said, luckily enough for me, I don't have to depend on it, so it's a little
Yeah.
pressure off. But if I did, I would definitely approach it differently. I'd approach my pricing a little
Mm.
differently, maybe bump the numbers up. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I'd say to anyone beginning or starting off their journey in freelancing art, I could definitely
Yeah.
talk to people who've been doing it for a while and sort of
Nice.
use their process. It's inevitable that it's gonna work. If it's working
Yeah.
for them and you have the skills to, it'll work for you too.
Mm. Nah, there's a lot of things that you said, and you know, there's different avenues and different perspectives. But I'm just thinking about, like, you know, the young designers that are coming up, people that are just starting out. Let's so we talked about, you know, a lot of good things, more like, okay, you know, you had your background in architecture. From there, that's when you did, you know, freelance work on the side. You started out by the homies, and from there you built that word of mouth. But
Yeah.
let's talk about the downsides of freelancing. Like, what would you say are the most annoying parts of freelancing, whether it just may be the work in general or just working with clients? Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, this sort of hobby, I'm gonna say hobby, started off for my own personal exploration. I didn't start it thinking I
Mm,
was gonna get good and start charging people, making money off of it. And
yeah,
up to this day, I like to think it's still something that I do for myself. And
yeah.
you know, because of that, I like to not dwell too much on you know, because it'll definitely start stressing me out, and I don't need my
Mm,
hobby to be stressing me out. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And so
exactly.
whenever it's sort of getting towards that edge, you know, yeah, of course, clients are hard. I've dealt with hard clients, uh, and
Like,
because I
what
don't,
was hard about them? Like, hard, like
yeah,
with dealing with them.
yeah, it's more the cooperation. Um, so, for
Mm,
example, they might not be too clear over their requirements, and I make it
yeah.
clear from the jump, like, yo, like, it's a very sort of loose definition thing. Like, you let me do my thing, you see what you want, I'll let you buy the second edition for switch it up completely if you need to, but
Yeah.
you know, understand that that'll run the check up a little bit because you're eating up some more of my time. And you know, yeah, you run into just non cooperative clients. But of course, it's a skill as a freelancer to know how you're going to tackle that and go through that, and
Yeah.
sort of not just, you know, put your ego aside. Don't just don't let that offend you. Don't let their feedback offend you. Try and be as cooperative
Hmm.
as you can as well.
Hmm.
Another huge downside is also just the lack of security. Like, you don't of a job. I mean, like, there's no consistency.
Mm,
You're just kind of landing whatever you're landing. It comes down to you, how well you sort of market yourself, advertise yourself.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, that definitely starts off with not charging anyone anything, improving yourself,
Mm,
you know, and then eventually you can start to charge people. You figure out your pricing, like we said, and a lot of clients, you know, I've had this one encounter with a client who felt like I was charging too high of a price. My rates were too high. I'm like, all right, you know, you gotta.
I
That's
mean,
a big. Yeah, dude. Like, no one, you
you
know,
can go to the next designer, like.
you could go to the next designer. You could do it yourself. You could do what you need, but I'm promising a certain level of quality with my, you know, with my artwork. Hence why it costs a certain type of way. And
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of the hardest part is putting your ego aside with needy clients. Let's say needy clients.
Yeah, and it's so now, like, you know, we talked about, you know, how you started out, like the downfalls of, you know, well, like the cons of freelancing. But where do, like, what platforms, let's talk about the platforms that you use and the programs, like whether it may be Photoshop, Illustrator, Figma, all of these types of things. Can you talk a bit about, you know, what platforms you're really focusing on, like how you like market yourself on, like, I know I found you on Instagram, but how do you market yourself on these type of platforms, and how, like, what are the tools that you use to produce like the work that you're doing?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I say that I probably don't do as good of a job as I could do in terms of utilizing the platforms that I have at my disposal. I say
Yeah.
that because I'm only on Instagram. That's all I use.
Mm,
Uh, a lot of freelancers who are taking it a little more seriously than I am would probably have their own website, their own sort
yeah.
of domain that you can go to as a client, check out their portfolio online, that type of stuff.
Hmm.
I just have my portfolio here on my hard drive and on Instagram. You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
don't really have it out there like that. And because of that, like I said, I'm sort of purposefully limiting myself so that I don't get carried away in this sort of you know, this side hustle, let's say, because like I do have an
Mm,
architecture career to focus on.
yeah.
But if I didn't, I would most definitely probably have my own website, put up all my artwork there, have it as a way where any client can sort of click that link and check out my body of work.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of the programs that I use to create the artwork, it's definitely mostly, or I'd say like 60% is Photoshop. I use a
Mm,
lot of Adobe Suite, and so if there's
okay.
any sort of vector work that needs to be done, that's Illustrator. InDesign for the layout, but I'm early in projects that are that big, and so it's Photoshop mainly. I use a lot of 3D modeling softwares. So all these skills I really
Okay.
picked up in my
Yeah,
during my degree for architecture, and
for sure.
so it's a software called Rhinoceros, which you use.
Rhino.
A lot
Never
of
heard of
people are
that.
probably more familiar with Google SketchUp, which is sort of like the
Okay.
competitor. And
Yeah.
so I use Rhino, throw it into Lumion or Enscape or any of those rendering programs, kind of add some effects that
Mm,
are like the finishing touches, and then throw that into Photoshop and manipulate that however I need, add the filters, add play around with lighting, that type of stuff. But it's
yeah.
most designers worldwide should be familiar with at least half of the programs that I mentioned. They're pretty
For
set.
sure. Yeah. I mean, if you don't know what Photoshop is, like, I mean, or
Right,
Adobe Creative Suite, like, I don't
right.
know why you're here. But not like how it's interesting, right? Because it's like, I don't know, I felt like, but maybe like 5 to 10 years ago, to be able to master Photoshop was pretty daunting. It's like, oh my God, it's like, but
Yeah.
so for like, if you were just starting out again and you were learning Photoshop, like, how were you able to, obviously, like, it's a lot of practice, but what things would you say, hey, like, focus on these areas first. Once you get these fundamentals, like, this is what's next.
Yeah, so I definitely recommend sort of the path that I took, and that's
Okay.
taking a class. Like take a class, like pay
Mm,
someone for a class, uh, and the class will kind of help you with the fundamentals and the basics of the program, specifically
mm,
Photoshop. You don't
yeah,
need to take any advanced classes or any sort of courses that teach you like the more advanced stuff. You really just need to get a grasp of the basics, and then once you
yeah.
kind of know how the program works and the skeleton of the program, you can build off of YouTube videos, Instagram videos. The community
Mm,
online is huge. Everyone's encouraging people to learn. But to
yeah,
get the basics is so important because you got to know
yeah.
like the difference between raster work and vector work and all that kind of stuff. No one's going to teach you that if you don't pay them. So take a class. I
Facts.
was lucky enough to
Yeah.
take a graphic design 101 class in college, which happened to be
Love.
part of the requirements from our architecture degree. So I didn't have to
Mhm.
pay any extra money I wasn't gonna pay. But after figuring
Yeah.
that out, you know, you take your own initiative to kind of pick up any. You learn what that tool that you've been looking at for the last year and not knowing what it does. You learn what it does.
Yeah.
You learn a couple filters, and up to this day, man, like I'd like to say I'm pretty confident in my skills, but I'm learning something new every single on Photoshop.
Yeah. For sure. And it's interesting that you say that, because it's like, I mean, I just think, like, just in life in general, right? You're always a student. Even when you're an expert, there's always new things to learn, or
Oh
there's
God,
always a
bro.
new way where you can innovate.
Oh God. Oh
Especially
God.
like with design, it's like trend here, trend here, trend here, minimalism this, minimalistic that,
Mhm.
like before you know it, like,
Yeah.
that's not hot anymore. You got to learn the new
Yeah. Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So with that said, right, like, you're talking about, like, the foundation, like, okay, like, you take a class, you learn all of these things, but obviously, like, there's designers that, once they have that foundation, they're more intermediate. So what are your thoughts about, like, plugins? Like, do you utilize plugins in Photoshop? Like, what's your approach to that?
I do utilize plugins in Photoshop. Certain plugins just really kind of do the trick in bridging the gaps that Adobe doesn't
Mm,
provide with the tools in Photoshop.
yeah.
When I say that, I'm specifically thinking about rendering. Uh,
Mm,
so you can sort of like, there's a plugin that I use called I'm gonna plug in the plugin, I guess. It's called Eye Candy.
Okay, eye candy. Take notes, take notes. Eye candy.
Yeah, Eye Candy is huge. Eye Candy is huge. Eye Candy essentially supplements Photoshop's rendering skills to make them what it needs to be. And so on Photoshop, for example, on Illustrator, you can like there's this feature where you can extrude and bevel on Illustrator specifically, but it's basically making a vector sort of like look 3D without having to draw all those lines. But the issue with that is the program's like built-in sort of feature doesn't really do too well of a job in that. And once you have that feature going, it's kind of slow. It crashes your program. And so iCandy supplements that, lets it run the way it usually runs, and also adds a ton of features that just make it look like a finished product while you're working. Yeah, what are my thoughts on plugins? I support them completely. The rendering software that I use is technically a plugin for the 3D modeling software that I use. So yeah, you need plugins. You're really sort of limiting yourself if you just close that door of plugins. You're just using what the programs have to offer, which most of the time is not enough.
Right. And like, speaking about plugins, like where do you go to find them? Is it more like you see a designer and you see the plugin they're advertising, you're like, yo, that's cool, like I would love to use that? Or are you actively like how do you find the plugins that you're using, and two, how are you able to understand, okay, like this is worth the investment? Because like most plugins are not free.
Yeah, most of the time, I was just saying, most of the time the creator will sort of, after trying the plugin like hands-on, they figure out, they're most of the time convinced that they need it because they realize that it could really help the rest of their project. But I was saying, in terms of coming up on the plugin, it's not really intuitive. It's almost backwards. I don't go looking for the issues that I'm running into and then see a plugin that solves this issue. It's more so I see a product, like I see the finished product, and I'm like, oh shit, that is so dope. And I try to come up on the process. What did they use to get that process? And then I learned about a certain plugin that they use. You quickly look up a couple videos, tutorial videos on YouTube, figure out that, like I said, you don't need to commit right away. And so you try it, you get the trial, you learn the ropes. And it's rare for me to try something and not end up, subscribing or buying it, downloading it. So it's, the process is backwards. You kind of see the finished product and try and figure out how they came about that.
For sure. No, that makes sense. But yeah, like pretty much we're closer towards the end of the interview now. Is there a question that you would, like to ask us, or is there a question that you wish like we asked during the interview that you feel like, okay, like I'm a young designer, or just even like a intermediate or a designer that is already somewhat established, like it's like, what pieces of advice or what things would you like to share with the community?
Yeah, man. I don't have questions per se, but I do have a couple points that I, had to grind to find out, and I'd like to sort of fill in anyone who's listening, kind of save you some time and energy. Definitely. So this is a two-pointer. So definitely pay for a class on whatever software you're trying to learn, but only for the basics. Because nowadays with the internet, like in this age, man, you can learn absolutely anything you want online for free. But no one's going to teach you the little nuances that a professional would. And so hire someone just to get the hang of the basics, and then take it from there. Also, figure out your pricing. To any freelancers out there, figure out your pricing early on, and do that by sitting and talking to people who've been doing it for a while.
Right.
Yeah, because I definitely lost some money in the first couple of projects just because I didn't know how to market myself and price it the right way.
Speaking about that, like, have you ever negotiated? And if so, like, how did that process look like for you?
I want to negotiate to a client, like in real time, because all that's showing is like, you're not really confident in your pricing, right? And you generally don't want to give a number that's too high for them to even think about it's negotiable. Or else it's like, all right, man, like, it's clear that just off the jump, you and I are, butting heads in an issue that we shouldn't even butt heads with because there's a lot
Yeah.
more to be discussed. So,
Right.
yeah, figure out your pricing. Don't do something outrageous. Don't think you are more than what you are. You'll get there eventually, but when you're figuring that stuff out, don't overshoot. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is it's really hard because you don't want to undershoot either. You want to get paid what you think you're valued at. So the best way is just kind of to talk to someone who's in your area, who's doing that in the
Mm,
relative market that you're at, and
yeah,
get a ballpark. You don't need to copy the numbers. Get a ballpark. I'm
for
trying to just look
sure.
out for the people who depend on that.
Yeah, 1000%, 1000%. Well, thank you so much, Ferris. Like it's been an absolute pleasure. You know, just you already providing a unique point of view, right? Like you actually went to school. Now, I don't think that you necessarily have to go to school for it, but like you said, right, taking a course, having the foundations down, and then once you have the foundations down, then it's like starting small, understanding how to brand and market yourself, all of those types of things. So nonetheless, like I'll tag you, I'll share your information like for the pod, and so like any like you might get some DMs from people saying, hey, like I heard you from here and there, but other than that, thank you so much.